Welcome back, everybody. This is video part 2 in the off-grid cabin build series. Now, in this video, we're going to be talking about beams most importantly. Yes, we'll be stripping the forms, we'll do a little grading, but how do you size the beam to go from footer to footer and span that gap and spread the load between the footers from the weight of the structure? Well, we'll be getting into that in this video. Here we go. Hi everyone, I'm David and welcome to my channel where we are continuing the series building an off-grid cabin. First off, I need to strip all these wood forms. I use the wood forms to help me line up and secure the sonotubes while I poured the concrete. I didn't want anything shifting. Now I don't want to leave that sonotube in place, so I'm stripping it off. And then I need to round over the top edge of that so that hopefully I don't have big chunks of concrete breaking off in the future. And you can see my kids there helping me pick up the big chunks of concrete. I don't want to leave those behind. So I'm going to rent a dumpster at the end of this whole big project to throw all the debris away. And I was pretty satisfied with how the concrete anchors all lined up with each other. Now my biggest concern with the dirt is that there were some low spots in between all the footers, and I don't want those collecting water over time or having any standing water under the cabin. So I'm spreading out a lot of dirt here. I'm removing the big rocks. At one point I grabbed a big iron bar and was ramming it down next to the concrete. Once I was satisfied with that, I got my very first look at how the beams would be positioned. I'm finally at a point where I want to move on to the beams. Now the beam needs to span from one support to the next and take the weight of the structure. Now from one support to the next support, the clear span, not center to center, but the clear span is about 4.33 lineal feet. Let's look at the code. First, we're going to look in the chapter for floors because this beam is supporting the floor joists. Now beams supporting floor joists have a special name called girder. And it says right here to refer to chapter 6, specifically tables R602.7. So let's go over here, and that's these tables. And so these can be used for headers in a wall or floor girders for supporting floor joists. On this side, we can see that this represents our situation. It's saying that this girder is going to support a roof, a ceiling, and one clear span floor. Well, that's our situation. At the top, we can see it's broken into 3 big columns based on ground snow load. That's 30 pounds, 50 pounds, and 70 pounds. In my area, it's 40 pound per square foot snow load, but we'll have to bump up and use the 50 pound because there's no 40 pound reference. Then it says building width. Well, my building is 12 feet and there actually is a 12-foot column. So we're going to use that. Well, it says here span and number of jack studs. Well, we're not actually having jack studs, so all we care about is the span. So we're going to look at this column right next to the ruler. Let's zoom in and get really close here. The clear span that I have is about 4 feet and 4 inches. So we're going to look in this column here for anything over 4 feet, 4 inches. So you can see a single 2x10 is not strong enough. A single 2x12 is strong enough. It can span it. But that would be really, really tippy. So we keep going down the line. And we can see that we could use a double 2x8. But again, I want to fatten that up. So if we go to a triple 2x8 right here, it can span 6 foot 5 inches. So we got plenty of strength. We have plenty of stiffness, so we're not going to have a bouncy floor. And we also have a very stable girder in this case that won't want to tip over. Now before I can go and nail the beams together, I have to check for level between each footer. Now we did that while we poured the concrete, but things always move a little bit and they're never perfect. So this is my chance to add little shims as needed. So I have a 16-foot long 2x8 pressure treated on both sides. And what's interesting is I can see that, for example, this one has contact, but over here, it's still loose. It's not touching that footer. It's nice and straight. And down here, we're not touching the metal. So this thing is actually free floating. It's not touching this footer anywhere, but it is touching this footer. So what I'm going to use in this situation is an asphalt shingle. I'm going to cut a piece of asphalt shingle as my shim, and I'm actually going to put a piece under all of them, but I'm going to put 2 under this one and 1 here where we already had contact, 2 under this guy, and 1 over here on the far end. Now that asphalt shingle, it's going to last a very long time. I have been on renovation projects where these things are probably 60 plus years old and still holding up just fine because, you know, they're not exposed to the weather. They're hidden underneath here. If you guys have a better idea of what could be used for a shim in a situation like this, I'm all for it, but that's what I'm going to use. And I'm using a straight blade here. With asphalt shingles, you really want to use a curved blade, but I'm making do with what I have. So we're talking 5.5 inches, because that's how wide it is. There you go. So that's 1 shim. There we go. So it looks like it's still not bearing weight, but I can hear it scraping the granulars. So that's the process of going down. That's just 2 shims down, but I'll keep cutting some and adding some to the other side, and we'll see if we can't get this whole thing so that we have some touching going on all the bearing surfaces. I recognize that this is way more time than somebody would normally take in building an off-grid cabin. But I'm a strong believer in making sure the foundation is as perfect as you can, because then when you build the wood frame off from it, the wood frame just goes so fast. When I put in the forms for the concrete, I spent a lot of time trying to make them level, but of course nothing is perfect. Now that it's stable with the dirt packed around it, I'm using this laser level to help me find how many shims I need for each one. Now this is an indoor one. It's relatively inexpensive as far as laser levels are concerned. It's really meant just for hanging cabinets or things like that. So I had to wait for it to get kind of dark out here so I could see. But let's go around. I've got them all now shimmed where I think it's as close as I can. I was going for within 1/8 of an inch. This spot right here is showing at 9.5. And I've got 1 shingle in there as my shim. So I was writing down the heights in chalk on the foundation of each one so I could figure out how many shims I need. And you'll see some of them I had to go more than just a single piece of asphalt. So we're looking for 9.5 on the ruler. Now, as you can see over here, I added a piece of 1/2 inch pressure treated plywood, and that's on top of the asphalt shingle. And now we have 9.5 inches on the ruler. But now I've got the same height on the ruler all the way around. So these are now all level. And tomorrow we'll put the beams in, the 2x8s, and actually make the beams. Standard 2x lumber is 1.5 inches thick. So in a perfect world, this would be 4.5 inches. However, we're a little bit more than that. We're 4 3/4. And that's because pressure treated lumber comes typically wet. And so the thing is that I can't get 2 1/2 inch spacers in here, which is pretty common. So this is just a scrap of 3/4 inch, and it goes in there pretty snug. So I'm gonna cut some 3/4 inch spacers. So these are 2x8 by 16 foot, but they don't always come 16 feet long. In fact, all 3 of them are a little bit longer. So I'm gonna trim them all down so they're flush. The 3 2x8s are on here, and they need to act as 1 beam. So to do that, we need to fasten it together. Now there is gonna be a nailing schedule that I'll do, but first I'm gonna bolt it together to make sure that all the plies are tight and we don't have gaps. So I'm going to use this product instead of, say, carriage bolts, or you could use regular bolts with nuts and washers. This is just quicker and easier. So it's a 2-part system. You have your long screw on one side and you have a nut on the other, and they tighten onto themselves. So hopefully this works out well. I've used it before and I like these. So inside the box there's a bag with some extra washers, but it also comes with a 5/16 nut driver. So these have a pointy tip on them, so we don't have to pre-drill. I did play around with this already, so that's why there's a hole there, but once I see the tip coming out on the other side, I'm going to take the nut, I'm going to thread it on as far as it'll go, and then it'll self-tighten. See, it just kind of sinks that in there nice and tight. Okay, so I'm going to drive this in on the other side now. Go, see the tip coming out. So I'm just going to thread this on. So you see there's just a little bit of threads coming out right now. So I'm going to thread it on. And just by hand, I'm getting it tight, and then there's little teeth on there that will bind and hold it. So that's the process. I figure I'll put 2 of these in at each bearing point, and then I'll go back in and fill in with nails. Now, pneumatic nails shoot so fast that they don't do a good job of clamping the plies together. So you could screw the plies together, you could use a regular carriage bolt. There's a few different methods of doing that, but the point is you need the plies together, and then you can shoot it with the fasteners. Alternatively, you could use common nails and sink them with a hammer, and that helps cinch it together. But I don't think it does as good of a job of using something like the through lock that goes all the way through and kind of has that fastener on both sides. These are 12-penny nails for my pneumatic nail gun, and they are galvanized. It's very important to use fasteners approved for pressure-treated lumber. So in this case, galvanized is approved for it. So we're gonna go through and fasten this. Now the fastening schedule is important. You need to go every 1 foot on center, alternating sides. So I'm gonna bring you in close so that we can see that. Usually you just eyeball it, but I will mark it out for everybody to see on camera. The nailing schedule is every 1 foot on center, alternating sides. So I made a mark at 6 inches in, and then every 1 foot on center after that. So let's see how that works. Okay, so now 1 foot on center is right here. 3, and now this is the 2 foot mark. And wherever there's a proud nail, we're gonna go sink it. So now it's fully fastened, acting as one. And I'm just gonna do it on the other beam as well. So the beams are fastened together and they're acting as one, but we don't know if they're square yet. I know they're the same length. Just hook it on the very outside edge, please. And I'm measuring to the outside edge over here, 232 3/4, 233 1/4, okay? So we're 1/2 an inch off, which means we need to move it 1/4 of an inch. So we'll do that. All right, so we got 233 on the nose. Let's jump over to the other side, and 233 on the nose. So we've got the 2 beams perfectly square, and now we can fasten them to the foundation. And yeah, they won't move anymore. So I'm gonna put them in. They're hot dipped galvanized again, because that's what we have to use with pressure treated. All right, now you can see it helped with the nails. The beams are now fully fastened to the concrete anchors, and at this point you would normally be done. I'm going to go one little step further, simply because we have a lot of rain coming up in the next week before I get the framing on, and I'd rather not water get down in here and swell. So what I'm going to do is use a piece of flashing tape. In this case, it's just Grace Vicor, but it could be any flashing tape. I'm just going to roll it on top, and that way when it rains, it's not going to get down in between the plies. So just a little precaution against the beam kind of warping or swelling over the course of the next few weeks or months while I build the rest of the frame on top of it. And I don't want it to look bad on this face because that will be seen as you walk up. So I'm gonna err on the side of going towards the middle. We're just gonna line it up. This is a J roller. And I'm just lining it up with that edge. Well, I ran out of Vicor, so I'm switching over to some 3M all-weather flashing tape. Again, just something that I have on hand. Well, there we go, everybody. The beams are secured, they're fastened together, they're level not only across the length, but also level to one another, and they are square to one another. I have confidence now that when I build the wood frame on top of this, it's going to go smoothly and easily, much more so than if I hadn't taken the care in this stage. So if you agree with that, please like, subscribe, comment, and share. Or if you think this was just total waste of time and overkill, let me know that also in the comments below. Thank you everybody so much for watching.